Well, welcome to the Devon and Cornwall Record Society's next podcast in our 2023 winter series. And you know that all these other ones we've done before are also on our YouTube channel, and they can be found through the Society's website. So this Devon and Cornwall Record Society. Now, we have a different type of topic altogether today, a very interesting book which was highlighted at the Devon History Society's Devon Book of the Year Awards just before Christmas, I think it was. How time flies. And we have Dr. Julia Neville with us. And welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Todd. Welcome.
And now I'm going to ask you the very simple, straightforward question. What is the essence of this book? Tell me what it's all about.
Okay, so the book I'm going to be talking about is called Devon Women in Public and Professional Life, 1900 to 1950, Votes, Voices and Vocations. It's a multi-authored book, so it's not just me, but colleagues from the Devon History Society, Anne Roberts, Helen Turnbull, Mitzi and Paul Ochterlony, all contributed to the authorship. It's a collection of 8 biographies of women who were active in Devon in that period, with an introduction which sets them in the context of women's history more generally. And the common theme of it really is about how local women, and there aren't many books about local women, worked to extend opportunities for other women in all sorts of different fields during the period after women got the vote in 1918. And I think, Todd, we probably need to credit you with the idea, because back in 2009, was it, you published a book called Remarkable Women of Devon, which you said, and rightly so, was probably one of the first local collections that were about women rather than about the lives of men. And at the end of it, you had a chapter which I think really expressed the range of women about whom material could also be written. And my colleague Mitzi, I seem to remember, asked you, were you going to do a follow-up version? And you kind of said, no, you'll have to write it yourselves. So we did, but it took us a very long time. It took us, I think, more than a decade. Because we broke off to do things like, fighting the First World War with the centenaries and so on. But we finally got there in the end, and now we've published the book, and the book contains 8 biographies about women, 2 women who were active professionally, Dr. Mabel Ramsay and Miss Jessie Headridge, 2 women who were active on the political scene, Eleanor Acland of Killerton, and Mrs. Clara Daymond, who was active at a local level on Plymouth Council, and 4 women who were more active in community settings. So Dame Georgiana Buller, whose name will probably be familiar to people from her work at the Princess Elizabeth Orthopaedic Hospital, for example, Lady Florence Cecil, the wife of the bishop, who's very active in the voluntary sector, and 2 women particularly active in community movements like the Women's Institute, Lady Clinton and Sylvia Calmady-Hamlyn. So our book describes their lives and the contribution that they made to change and improvement in Devon, some of their failures and some of their successes.
Well, why do you think it is that, here we are, 2022, the book comes out, I think, and most, the majority of local historians are women. The majority of the population, marginally women, and yet it's taken so long. Women are obviously interested in the history of women, and yet it's such a minority topic. And I find it, what I did was a taster to say that, the material exists and there is lots there. And if you think of them as pioneers or remarkable, however you want to think of it, they've always been there, just not recognized. Why do you think it's taken so long? Because there are lots of counties in England that still don't have anything at all.
That's very true. And I mean, it's hard to totally explain it, but I suppose there are things such as the picture of history in general. So, for example, recently they've been repeating that Simon Sharma series on television about the history of Britain. And that's really 1980s, but it's couched mostly in terms of the lives, not just of men, but of great men. So we've had to move our focus from looking at that top echelon of society, where mostly it is men who make an impact, into understanding that beneath that surface layer, there's a whole set of people who also have histories that need to be written. And that's true of men as well as women.
Yeah, I
So
mean, the Sharma series is very good.
Yeah.
Boy, is it old-fashioned.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
So,
we're talking
we've
about
lifted
that.
the lid. Yeah.
Only that. We're going to ignore all of this.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
what kind of sources did you find? Because, you know,
that's the problem, isn't it?
you know, when you look at them, you know they're there. You know, did you have trouble identifying enough sources for all of them, or did you discard some women because you couldn't do them justice? I mean, what did you come up against?
You're right. The sources are such a limitation. I think we would have liked to have written biographies that were of a greater spread across classes, but the material just wasn't there. You get allusions to women, or a woman pops up and does something, you think that's interesting, but you can't actually find anything more about them. So these women are a narrower group than we would have wanted, because we needed to have enough information about their lives. Now, some of them, like Dr. Mabel Ramsay, is, I think you know, left a memoir, which is in one of the Royal Colleges. That was great. Some of them had family papers, so the Buller archive is extensive in the Devon Record Office. There's a family history of the Clintons. There are estate papers. There are institutional histories which cast light on them. So, for example, the Devonshire Association for Cripples' Aid or the Episcopal Modern School have archives that we could draw upon. But of course, one of the reasons why this period is such a rich one to explore is that the local newspapers are such a wonderful resource for documenting so much that was going on that you'd never get if you read local newspapers today. And they're much richer, perhaps even, than sometimes the formal records. So if you read the formal records of Plymouth Council, you don't get as good an impression of what Clara Daymond's role is as when you read about the debate in the newspapers. So newspapers are fabulous.
Yeah. Well, you know, you've got a topic which needs doing. You're struggling to write necessarily all the women you want, but you get your sources, you start comparing notes. What really did surprise you as you were writing it up? I mean, did something jump out at you and you think, now, crumbs, look at that?
I think what surprised us was that we had seen these women as interesting in their in pursuing their own furrow, as it were. So it's fascinating to read about Eleanor Acland and her work with the Liberal Party. We hadn't necessarily assumed there'd be a huge degree of connection between them. We thought they would be examples of very different types of work. What connection is there between X and Y? And we did find, partly it's a sign of the times. So the more, a considerable number of the women all supported, for example, very overtly, the League of Nations associations. So their experience of the First World War had been different. Some of them had worked, like Georgiana Buller in the war hospitals. Some of them had lost. So Lady Florence Cecil lost 3 of her sons. But they had all come out of that believing that the world needed to be a better place and we should not go to war again. So they were all supporting the League of Nations. A significant proportion of them supported the Girl Guides movement. I hadn't expected that, and it wasn't the main interest of many of them, but they did chip in and took up roles as being the district commissioner or local something or other, or like Eleanor Acland opened the grounds at Killerton for camping. So it's the sort of bits between their own particular interests that connected them. And I think that's quite a unique finding. I don't think I've seen anything about that same connection elsewhere. Well, partly because there aren't as many lives of women written as we've already said. I think the other thing is that they could rally together for a cause. So one of the contentious areas in the 1920s was, should there be women in the police forces? And this wasn't a primary focus for any of these women, but they all got together. And Plymouth had women police in the First World War, but the council decided to stop funding them. That the county force and the Exeter force had never had women. And in the mid-1920s, there was a concerted move to try to persuade councillors that women police would be a good addition to all the forces. And a number of these women took the opportunity to lobby their own councillors, but as part of a concerted effort. Now, that's an area in which they were unsuccessful. But I think that's really what surprised us, was that the degree to which they could get interested and support one another, as opposed to just wanting to pursue. So, for example, Lady Florence Cecil was the Diocesan and Mothers Union head. That was very much her focus. But she also got involved in these possibly peripheral issues, but in support of the other women. And they obviously knew one another and they stood on the same platforms. So unusually, when Sir Robert Newman, the Exeter MP, was effectively sacked by the Conservative Party and decided to run as a candidate, as an independent candidate in 1929, he attracted support from Georgiana Buller, not somebody who was very much involved in party politics, but also from Clara Daymond, who actually came over from Plymouth to support him because of his liberal attitude on women's issues and how impressed she'd been by the work he had done in the House of Commons. So yes, that surprised us when we drew the threads together, how much they had worked together and for the same aims.
When you were talking, something occurred to me. When I had been looking at women in the police, I saw, oh yes, we'll have them as typists. When they're not really in the police, they're just office workers. And people were saying, no, we actually want them, walking the streets more or less and doing work as a police officer does. And there was a bit of discussion, I think, in Plymouth that they were useful in situations at home where the male police officers couldn't talk to the women in the same way. And it just seemed, when you were talking, I thought, it's a very modern issue again. The nature of policing and gender and how safe a woman feels. So I suppose 100 years later, we're looking at something which hasn't really settled, and your work is actually of high relevance to what's going on today.
Yes, I often think when looking at the 1920s that I feel regretful that things haven't improved to the degree one would have liked to have, and that the issue about police and women's attitudes, but also the case they make in 1926 is particularly about the interrogation of children. Right. And that comes up as well. So it's about women and children, and the councillors are a bit more dismissive, and they say, well, we've got matrons looking after the cells, what more do you need? Yes.
It is incredible how 100 years doesn't make the difference we think 100 years would do in so many different issues. Well, the book is called Devon Women in Public and Professional Life, 1900 to 1950. How do our readers find it, given our readers are all over the world, our members are all over the world? What's the best way of accessing it?
Okay, so can I hold it up so that people can see it? And it's sort of the picture is related to the universal access to the parliamentary vote granted in 1928. So the book is published by the University of Exeter Press, and it costs £25. That's the list price. It can be found all over the internet with some discounted prices, or you can order it direct from the publisher, or you can walk into a bookshop and order it through, as they say, any reputable bookseller. But what I'd particularly like to feature, although naturally we all hope that everybody will go on possessing real books on real shelves, is that because we thought this is a book which should appeal not just to the local reader, but to students of women's history, there is an open access version. So if you go into the University of Exeter Press website, one of the options you will get to when you find the book is that you can download for free a PDF. So yes, do buy books because they're lovely. But if you want to have a quick look before you buy, you can download a PDF for free from the University of Exeter Press website.
Great.
So all sorts of ways.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Julia. I'm sure it's going to do well. It was awarded. Now, what was the prize by the Devon History Society?
I think it gets highly commended.
Highly commended, right? Well, which is, given there are only a couple of prizes, that's top 3. So if not top 2, so highly commended is great. Well, thank you very much. And to all our members and others who are listening, the next one is coming out in only a week's time, so keep an eye out for it. But until then, thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you for inviting me.